How would you say I'm not used to that work?
Na clapitje leis no bushin.
Welcome back to Ní Ansa, Not Difficult in Old Irish. This is the research podcast of the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. My name is Nina Knocker-Diu, and I'm an O'Donovan postdoctoral scholar here in the school. Today, I'm talking to Professor Ruairí Ó, Senior Professor and Director of the school. He will tell us how he became director and dive deeper into the history of the School of Celtic Studies and DIAS. From an 1851 census to the foundation of DIAS in 1940 and its evolution since then, Ruairí will take us on a tour of Irish and Celtic studies. We will focus on the research and researchers at the school and the school's many projects, including some new and exciting digital resources. Enjoy! All right, so welcome to the podcast, Ruairí. Thank you for
inviting me.
So we'll maybe begin first by talking about yourself. So you're currently the director of the School of Celtic Studies at DIAS. But can you tell us maybe a bit about your career beforehand? Where did you do your PhD and where did you work afterwards? What led you to this post?
Well, I think I'd have to go back to my days in secondary school. In those days, for the Leaving Cert examination, we had a very interesting curriculum. I studied Latin, but I also studied Irish. And the Irish became very, very interesting for me when we read texts from earlier periods. I became fascinated with the idea of language changing and the content of the texts themselves. We read texts from different books, from different dialects, and they all had an influence on me. So when I went to UCD, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to study, but I soon found my feet in Celtic studies. I took Modern Irish in first year. I took Welsh and Latin. And in first year, I had a very inspiring teacher, Brendan O'Madagan, who lectured us on the history of Irish literature from earliest times. And I was totally fascinated by it. I found it riveting. So I went on then to study Celtic Studies in second and third year. And there I encountered such luminaries as Francesca Connla, Tomás de Waldra and Tomás O'Cahasa. They all had an influence on me. And I was becoming more and more interested all the time. And I have to say that looking back, the things that interested me when I was 17 or 18 years of age still interest me, and I still follow through to them. It's sort of a lifelong passion. In any case, I graduated from UCD, and then I started working on a master's. In those days, you could do a research master's, which was just a major thesis, which I commenced. I was interested in Irish syntax. I started working on nasalising relative clauses and became fascinated with them and particles and all sorts of things. And then a post came up in Uppsala in Sweden, which I applied for and was successful in getting. Now, I was only 22 years of age when I was appointed, 23 when I took up the post. And I had to teach a very wide range of subjects, from Modern Irish at different levels, Old Irish at different levels, Modern and Medieval Welsh, Scottish Gaelic, and a course on the history of the Celtic peoples. And I have to say it was very, very challenging. I would sometimes only be a word or two ahead of my students, not just a line or two. In any case, I had 2 wonderful years in Uppsala. I learned an awful lot there, made friendships, which I still have. And then a post came up in Galway, just a year-long post in the Department of Modern Irish, where I was reunited with my former teacher, Brendan O'Madagan, who then became professor there. And I spent a wonderful year in Galway, made wonderful friendships. And I also had the wonderful experience of living for a year in the Conradh Gaeilge. It was a wonderful year, a year that made a great impression on me. And then after that, it was only a temporary post. A post came up in the University of Bonn. And I took myself off there for about 3.5 years. Again, it was a completely different experience. The department was headed by Karl Schmidt, who was a very eminent Europeanist. And the emphasis there was on historical grammar on the historical development of languages. I spent 3.5 years there, but then a permanent job came up in Belfast. And at the time, Belfast, for somebody from the outside, was not the most inviting. There was, after all, what was tantamount to a war going on there. And I arrived there in early 1985, I think. But I soon grew to love the place. I had wonderful students, a great, very small department. For a long time, there were only 3 of us. I was teaching, again, all different types of courses in modern Irish. Sometimes I had a colleague, Chulainn Andrews, who was the lecturer in Welsh. But when she took off on sabbatical, I took cover for her too. And I did a wide variety of subjects there. Again, I had very, very wonderful students. I'm still friendly with quite a number of them. And it was altogether a very, very positive experience. And then the chair of Modern Irish in Maynooth came up, and I applied for it and was appointed and moved to Maynooth, where I spent over 20 years. Again, making friends. Again, having it was a much larger department. And when I left in 2016, I think we had, between the departments of Old and Modern Irish, we had, of course, Kim McCone was Professor of Old Irish when I arrived there, and he was succeeded by David Stifta, who is currently Professor there. But the Department of Modern Irish had, I suppose, approaching 400 students, and about 100 maybe in the department. So it was quite, administratively, it was quite a significant department. And again, we're involved in organising conferences, in doing various different lectures and various other things. And of course, one of the high points was the fact that the International Congress of Celtic Studies came to Maynooth in 2011. I was the organising secretary of that. It was a very successful event. We brought in excess of 600 people to the campus. And over the week, we had a wonderful time. I think a very positive experience that most people related to me afterwards. And of course, what a lot of my other colleagues in other departments remarked and were totally in envy was the youth of so many of the participants. There were quite so many young scholars there, which was really something they stood in awe and in envy of. In any case, in 2016, then my current post, the post as a senior professor in the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies, became vacant. I applied for it, and I was successful, and here I've been ever since.
All right. Well, what an atra across time. So clearly you've worked on all sorts of aspects of Celtic studies and Irish especially, but you've published on a wide variety of things. But what is your current research? What are you currently working on? Well,
apart from the duties that attend my post as director, when I have time, I try and work on. I've been working on this for a very long time. It's an edition of an early modern Irish text, the training of Chulainn and the death of his son, Connlaoich. This has appeared in a number of different versions. There's one in Old Irish. There's the early modern Irish text that occurs in the Gin. It occurs as a poem, published composed in the 15th century, a number of ballads found in Scotland and Ireland, and also folk narrative. So I'm looking, the edition of the text forms the core, but I'm also examining how a tale, and it has of course an international tale, but the theme, the father and son combat, is found in a number of different traditions, found in Persian, in Germanic, in Russian, and also in Indic and in Greek. And seeing how this developed and was received by different audiences over a very long period of time. So that's approaching its close now. I hope to have it, to be able to publish it in the not too distant future. That's my main. Another area of research I have is in a person called Somhairle Domhnaill. People might know him, those who study Fíneacht, and there are people who are very interested in Fíneacht. Those who study Fíneacht will be familiar with the wonderful collection of Fenian poems and lays called Duanaire. And these were commissioned by him. He had a very interesting life. He was a member of the MacDonald family of Antrim, originally a Gallowglass family, a mercenary family who settled in Antrim. He was dispossessed in the wars of the early 17th century. He became a rebel. He became a pirate. He stole a ship which he sailed with his men to Dunkirk. He then joined the Irish regiment of the Spanish army and became a very distinguished soldier. And he disappears from view about 1632 or whatever. But during that time, he was associated with the Irish College in Louvain, which had been founded in 1607. And he commissioned or got one of his officers to collect the Fenian ballads that were coming in. And he made this wonderful collection of poetry we know as Duanaire Féin. He also was responsible a few years later for the compilation of the greatest body of classical Irish verse that we have, namely the Book of the O'Connor Don. So it's very, very interesting. So I've written a little bit on his biography and background. So I'd like to examine that in greater detail. Just as a person who was at this stage with the fall of the Gaelic order, who engaged with people on the mainland of Europe, and who had a very, very seemingly, it gives us an insight into a person, a soldier, but an abiding interest in literature as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating, and I've looked into Somhairle myself for my own research. So yeah, I understand the fascination with this figure. So maybe moving in a couple centuries ahead from this time, let's maybe turn to our focus today, the School of Celtic Studies in Dyas. So maybe first, can you, for listeners who might not be aware, can you tell us what is the school, what is Dyas, what do people do here?
Right. Well, the School of Celtic Studies is one of three constituent schools of the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. The Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies was founded in 1940 by the then Taoiseach, Eamon de Valera. Initially, it embodied two schools, a School of Theoretical Physics and a School of Celtic Studies. And it said that this was established by de Valera to satisfy two of his own interests. He was a mathematician and had an interest in physics. And of course, he had an interest in Irish and Celtic studies as well. And was founded on the model of the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies, Princeton, and it was the second in the world. Subsequently, a school of cosmic physics was added to it, and the intention was that people would be able to pursue the research without having heavy teaching duties. So the School of Celtic Studies, since its existence, we've been in existence for 85 years now, has the generation of scholars who've been here have pursued research on the wide range of Celtic studies, but also have a very strong publication role. And since our foundation, we've published well in excess of 300 titles, about 350 titles, covering not only early Irish, early modern Irish, dialectology, Hiberno-Latin and Welsh, and books on various aspects of literature. So at present we research. We also offer an outlet to postdoctoral scholars who spend typically 3 years with us here, studying, working on a project, which they publish. We publish, of course, also the school journal, which is Celtica. We organise a annual conference, the Chonnlaoich, every year. And there are other conferences that are organised as well. We encourage our scholars, for instance, to get involved as part of their training in organising conferences and also in helping with the editing of Celtica. So there's we're very busy. We have occasional lectures here. We invite people here. Some people spend sabbatical periods of leave with us here. So it's there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lot of different things going on here. So we'll talk about this a bit further. But first, kind of, let's go back to the start, the beginning. You said the institute was founded in 1940, but before that, there was a school of Irish learning led by Kuno Meyer, which I believe started in 1903 and seems to have been instrumental, at least in the kind of the background of why the institute was founded. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, exactly. You're quite right. Yeah, the School of Irish Learning came into being in 1903, founded by Kuno Meyer, as you mentioned. Now, to understand the School of Irish Learning, I think you need to understand what was happening for the decades prior to that. In 1851, there was a census carried out, and the results of that census, census was taken in the wake of the Great Famine, which had taken place in the 1840s. As a result of the census, it was shown that the number of native Irish speakers had declined drastically, and this became a source of great worry. Prior to this, you had people who were interested in the Irish language from a romantic or from an antiquarian viewpoint, but now the actual fate of the language was being put into clear focus. Now, 2 years after that, Johann Kaspar Zeuss published his Grammatica Celtica, and this work is credited with laying down the foundations for the modern study of the Celtic languages. And this developed at Zeuss Abel, then the subsequent volume in 1871, and this brought the Celtic languages into contact with research and scholarship on the mainland of Europe and elsewhere, because the Celtic languages up to then hadn't been fully studied or maybe not understood, and was a branch of Indo-European, which had some very old and very rich records, which were preserved in manuscripts, both on the continent of Europe, in Ireland and Wales and elsewhere, and they were linguistically and philologically, these materials were very, very important. So this inspired generations of scholars, many scholars on the continent. Journals were established, the Revue Celtique, and afterwards the Zeitschrift Philologie, and very many distinguished Celticists began the study of the Celtic languages. Now, apace with this, we had, of course, in Ireland, there was a native tradition of language and study and scholarship, best embodied in the figures of John O'Donovan and Eugene O'Curry, who were both very significant publishers and scholars of Irish. But the decline of the Irish language had brought about, firstly, the Society for the Preservation of the Irish Language, and then in 1893 it brought the foundation of Conradh na Gaeilge, or the Gaelic League. And this language movement burgeoned in its first years, and there were many branches founded throughout the country, and many thousands of people flocked. Eugene O'Curry's from Maynooth, his Simple Lessons in Irish were a bestseller. And people, it was a period of national awakening. People were becoming aware of cultural nationalism, of themselves, of who they were, of their place in Europe. And of course, the fact that so many continental scholars were also showing an interest in this served to validate what is happening in Ireland, or to support this external support. And you had people like, for instance, Heinrich Zimmer, who visited the Aran Islands and spent some time there, as did Holger Pedersen, and in further south you had Karl Marstrander, the Norwegian scholar, who spent some time on the Great Blasket Islands, and others who subsequently followed, like Robin Flower and people like that. So the Gaelic League, you had an awful lot happening in the country at the time. Both in, and of course, when people like Heinrich Zimmer or other people would come to speak in Ireland, their lectures would be reported in the national newspapers. And this was a subject that was of great interest in Irish polite society and society in general, and people would flock to them. And of course, the letters pages of the various different journals. There were Irish language journals like the Anclaid Solish and Irish Lear na Gaeilge, and other works, journals of that kind, that inspired people to become interested in it. Now, Kuno Meyer founded the School of Celtic Studies in 1903 with the object of bringing, I suppose, the insights and the rigour of scholarship to marry it to the incipient and to the growing revivalist movement. And of course, when we see that this marriage, if you like, that many of the most prominent Gaelic scholars at the time, or Celtic scholars at the time, people like T.F. O'Reilly, Osborne Bergen, Thomas Somhairle, and others were Owen MacNeill, Douglas Hyde, were members of the Gaelic League and also were involved in scholarship. So both were brought together. So the school was established. They ran courses in summer and Easter. And another very important figure who was associated with the school was John Strachan, a Scotsman who published some wonderful papers and some wonderful studies in Irish and Welsh, and who died tragically at a very young age of 45. But he was a hugely important figure as well. So many of the people who attended the school were to go on and become luminaries in the field of Celtic studies. And then, of course, later on in the second decade, of course, a lot of this then was channeled into political activism. And political activism became militant. And, of course, this led to the 1916 Rising and the subsequent War of Independence. But there were people involved in all strands of this. The figure of Owen MacNeill is a very interesting one. He was a founder member of the Conradh Gaeilge. He worked on the Coiste Gno for Conradh Gaeilge. He also was a scholar. He was the first professor of early Irish history at University College Dublin, and was leader of the Irish Volunteers at the time of the 1916 Rising. Others, such as Thomas Somhairle, first professor of Irish in Galway, had studied with the great Rudolf Thurnhuisen in Freiburg, became also took part in the War of Independence. And it's told about another great scholar, the great M.A. O'Brien, who studied and spent a long time in Germany. Before he left for Germany, he had to ask the permission of his commanding officer in the Republican movement for permission to take leave of absence to go and study instead of shooting people and getting involved in warfare and things like this. So the School of Irish Learning came into being at a time when there was great movement, and not just in Irish, of course. We had the Celtic Twilight, we had Lady Gregory, W.B. Yeats, the Abbey Theatre, and so many other things that were coming to the forefront at the time. But the School of Celtic Studies was hugely important. And another figure I'll mention, because you mentioned its connection with the School of Celtic Studies here. Another very important figure was Joseph O'Neill, or Joseph O'Neill, a native of Tuam, County Galway, who had studied, who had been a member of the school and had published in the school's journal, Eidheadh, again a very important initiative of the school, Journal of Celtic Studies, which still is in existence. Joseph O'Neill had published in Eidheadh and had been a stalwart of the school, but he, on his marriage in 1908, he didn't hold out that the prospects were great of getting a job in academic life. So he entered the school's inspectorate and seemed to disappear for a while. In any case, the school went on until about 1926 when it was wound up. At that time, Irish had been established in most of the universities in Ireland, and there were academic programmes being followed there. But De Valera decided that but there was so much to be done, of course, and that brought about the establishment of the School of Celtic Studies in 1940. But in order to establish the school, he needed the support of the civil service, and the secretary, the leading civil servant in the Department of Education, was a certain Joseph O'Neill, who had risen through the ranks and had become a prominent civil servant. So this sort of brings and marries in his person. You have an association between the School of Irish Studies and the School of Celtic Studies that later on was to come.
Yeah, that's a lot of people and a long kind of build up to 1940, to the establishment of the school. Can we go back a tiny bit and can you tell us a bit more about Kuno Meyer? He was German, I believe.
He was German. He was a native of Hamburg. He had studied with Windisch in Germany as well, and he got a post as a lecturer in Teutonic languages at the University of Liverpool. Now, very many of these people, like John Strahan, I mentioned, was a classicist, and they did work on Celtic studies on the side. They also had a very heavy teaching load and other responsibilities in their so-called main subject. But he published very, very widely. He was obviously a very enigmatic figure and very charismatic figure. He was enigmatic in certain ways, but he was very charismatic. And he obviously inspired quite a lot of people. Indeed, scholars from the School of Irish Learning would have gone to either to Liverpool to study with him or to Manchester, where John Strahan taught. Kuno Meyer was involved with the Zeitschrift für celtische Philologie, and he published a huge amount, a very wide range of texts. And even nowadays, if we read an edition by text or a discussion of text, you'll find, if you look at the bibliography, you'll find a long list of Kuno Meyer's publications. Kuno Meyer and also the Irishman Whitley Stokes, who was not a professional academic at all. He was a civil servant who spent most of his time, or much of his time, in India as a civil servant, but he also published quite a lot. So these figures who lived, who died well over a century ago, are still very, very highly thought of. But Kuno Meyer, the last years of his life were not the happiest, because he, as a German, he had supported the German effort in the Great War, World War I. He had then moved to Berlin to take the chair in Berlin. And he did sign off one of his articles he announced that it was on the day that Antwerp had been captured. And this did not find favour among many of his former colleagues who were English or who were in favour of the British and American war effort at the time. And the freedom of Dublin that had been granted to him was rescinded, and other privileges that had been granted to him were also rescinded, but were subsequently replaced. And he stands very high in the pantheon of Celtic scholars, and when you walk through the door of this building, you immediately encounter a very large portrait of Kuno Meyer, which hangs very proudly there on the wall of our building.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that it's fascinating to see all the historical ties and all the different people and the different historical context that it took to bring this institute about. And so the Institute for Advanced Studies Act of 1940, as it's called, so sets out the functions and the duties of the school, as including the publication of manuscript material in Irish, the philological study of Old, Middle and Modern Irish, the study of Irish dialects and Irish place names, the study of Irish history using Irish language sources, the publication of works on these topics and on other Celtic languages and literatures, the training of advanced students, the organization of seminars and conferences, and collaboration with other scholars and students of Celtic studies elsewhere, and quite a couple other things that I haven't mentioned. So that's a lot of duties for the school, as you mentioned earlier. So can you tell us maybe the reasoning behind all of these duties, and how do they correspond with, as you mentioned before, maybe gaps in research or in existing knowledge at the time?
Yeah, well, as you say, the field is very, very wide. But you mentioned the publication of manuscript materials, and that still is very much a core activity. There is so much in manuscript that hasn't yet been published. Or, to put it another way, some of it that was published in the first wave of publications by people like Kuno Meyer and Whitley Stokes, John Strahan and others, and is with more manuscripts come to light and so on, is in need of being reviewed and being maybe updated. But behind the literature and the language, there was a society, and we have to understand the society in which this body of literature in Ireland and elsewhere came into being. The people, the networks, the people who worked with the literature, the people who wrote it, and there are many other aspects of it that need to be covered. Now, as you've correctly listed there, the duties set out in the Act, in order to perform or to fulfil each of these duties perfectly, we would need a massive team of people here. As it is, we're down a number of people from our normal complement. We hope to have it restored. So we try and do our best to cover what we can. And we have prioritised, we have looked at areas and we work on areas such as early modern Irish, Welsh, Middle Welsh. We look at dialectology, we look at literature, and we look at publications from various different aspects. Now, I should also point out that the school serves the community of Celtic studies, not just in Ireland, but worldwide. And so scholars come here and spend time here. It's very, as you know, Celtic studies is quite an international discipline. They spend time here. But also scholars who are working in different institutes and who publish works look to have them published with us here. Because as I mentioned before, our publication function is one of the main functions of the school. It takes up a lot of time, but it's very, very valuable. And also the conferences and the other activities we run. In a perfect world, we would like to have far more people working for us here and covering many of the areas that we're unable to cover adequately because of it's a question of resources. But we're doing our very best, and we're succeeding as far as I'm concerned in covering what we can. But obviously we would like to do far more.
Yeah. Indeed. It's a lot to cover, and there's not enough people in the field as it is anyway, nevertheless in the school. And so how did the school after 1940, at the very kind of beginning of its existence, how did people try to cover these duties, and who worked there? How did it all happen?
Yeah, well, obviously when the school was set up, it went to the universities and took from them, or appointed from them, some of the leading luminaries in Celtic studies, including Osborne Bergen, UCD, T.F. O'Reilly, Ori Best, who had been working in the National Library, who was a bibliographer, and several others. And they began to work on the Journal of Celtic Studies, the Journal of the school. Celtica was established, and the statutory lectures were established as well. That was part of the legislation, and they began programmes of publishing works. Some of the programmes had been in train before then. For instance, the Blue Book series, the Medieval and Modern Irish series, had already started under the aegis of the Department of Education in the 1920s, but that was taken over by the School of Celtic Studies and other publications. And then they organised summer schools and people came here, international students came here, and they began to build up the profile. And again, there was an interest. Some of the people were quite colourful. T.F. O'Reilly, of course, published the famous lecture on the Two Patricks, and this was from people who'd been brought up on the legend of St. Patrick and all that went with it, were somewhat put out of it by the fact that there might have been two St. Patricks. But he researched like that, and it did, at the time, it did attract public attention. There were journalists who could mediate the findings of the academy or academic life to the public, and there'd be accounts published of statutory lectures and things of that nature. But it progressed and grew and developed its publication portfolio, attracted scholars to work here or to publish with us here, and to develop in that way.
Yeah, that sounds great. And so you've mentioned T.F. O'Reilly and a few others. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about these scholars? Because, I mean, when you look at the list of people who worked at the school throughout the years, it's really a who's who of Celtic studies. There's so many famous people that I would know as a student and as a postdoctoral scholar that their work has been so important in establishing the scholarship that is still going on now. So can you maybe pick out a couple figures and
well, I mean there are the figures I mentioned at the beginning. T.F. O'Reilly, a wonderful scholar, an unrivaled knowledge of the Irish language in all its forms, and of Scottish Gaelic, and who is endowed with a wonderful scholarly imagination. This is best brought to bear in his wonderful book, Early Irish History and Mythology. Sometimes my former teacher, Prof. McConnell, would refer to sometimes as early Irish hit and miss, because some of the theories now mightn't be accepted, but it showed a vast scholarly imagination, which is not found in every scholar. Osborne Bergen, on the other hand, was a different type of person. He published some very, very fundamental articles. It was said of Bergen that he wouldn't publish anything until he was quite sure it was absolutely perfect. But he published some really groundbreaking articles, did a lot of work on early Irish bardic poetry, and did other studies as well. Other people who followed would be people like M.A. O'Brien, again a person with a great scholarly imagination, and again with a great man of singular habits. His obituary, written by Miles Dillon, gives us an insight into a really fascinating type of person who studied in Germany, who worked in Germany, who became interested in Basque and Russian and other languages as well, and roamed widely. He didn't publish as much. He worked very much on the genealogies, but he didn't publish as much as we would have wished, because he's such a wonderful mind. And then we have people like Daniel Binchy, who will be associated with the study of Irish law, whose Corpus Juris Hibernici has laid down the foundations for the subsequent study of law that has blossomed in recent times. People like James Carney, a very interesting scholar in that he had very strong literary sensitivities, and he published a number of very, very important papers and challenging papers. He wasn't always the most his ideas weren't always the most fondly looked upon when they appeared at the time, because I suppose when you go through different phases of a subject, and at one stage it went through the phase that Irish was a very archaic Indo-European language. Not only was it an archaic language, but the society that was reflected in the text was also archaic, and this, I mean, people like Miles Dillon and others were finding sort of archaic linguistic features there, and it was very, which still stand the test of time, was very, very interesting. But Carney was arguing for people of literature, people writing not as conduits of an ancient Indo-European tradition, but people who were thinking people of literature, who had encountered Latin literature and various different texts, and in a famous phrase, who drew upon their entire literary experience, be that oral, be that in written form, be that in Irish, in Latin, or wherever else. He was a very, very interesting person. Another person who had a great mind, a great linguistic mind, was David Green, who came from Trinity College. He was a very influential scholar, and some of his papers on the development of the Irish language are so keen and insightful that they'll stand a very, very long test of time. And there are many others. One person I'll mention is T.F. O'Reilly's sister, Cecile O'Reilly. She was a professor here. She never became a senior professor, but she was a professor here. And she had worked for many years in Wales as a school teacher in Wales, but she came here and she set upon, under the strict eye of her brother, editing various different texts, early modern Irish texts. But the text she became most associated with is the great Irish saga Táin Culainn. She published the Stowe version of that in the early 1960s. Later in 1967, she published the Book of Leinster version with a translation, an introduction and notes. And then in the 1970s, she published Recension 1. And I would argue that her work on these texts laid down the foundation for much of the subsequent work that was to bloom on these texts as literature, on literary studies. So she very much laid down the foundation for that, I think, and she was a hugely important figure in our discipline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, indeed. And speaking of Cecile O'Reilly, it's a shame that few women really were promoted to the ranks of professor and senior professor, as you said. So is that something that the school is trying to rectify? And can you maybe tell us about other women that worked in the school? Oh
yeah. Well, I mean, if we go back to the beginning, to the School of Irish Learning, there were very, very many women involved in it. One person I'd single out who was hugely important, not just to the school, but to the subsequent development of the field of Celtic Studies, was Alice Stopford Green. She was a historian. She was the widower of John Green, who had been a successful. She was a woman of means, but she contributed greatly and financially to the school itself. And she provided bursaries which allowed people like Thomas Somhairle and Osborne Bergen to go to Freiburg to study with the great Thunaisen. And Joseph O'Neill also benefited from her. So she was, through her munificence, many people who might not otherwise have been able to find a niche in Celtic Studies were able to develop. We look at Thunaisen was brought over in 1911 to hold a school, a summer school, as part of the summer school. He taught at the summer school of the School of Irish Studies. And some of the pictures, we have one downstairs in the hallway, shows a considerable number of women scholars, people like Maura Power, who died at a tragically young age of 28, and she just published the Irish Astronomical Tract. Her sister Annie Power is there. There was Mary Hutton, who'd worked on Táin Culainn, and there were several others. Later on, people like Eleanor Knott, of course, a hugely influential person, and on the dictionary of the Irish language. There are very many female scholars who had worked on that. But you're quite right. In the age that was there, women reached a certain level and didn't progress any further, and hopefully that now is gone, and or at least is in the process of changing, and people will be valued for their own worth, not because of their sex or gender, but of their own worth, and we're committed to that, and in appointments here we'll try to get the very best people. And if the person happens to be a woman, wonderful.
Well, that's great to hear. And so you've been talking about so many great scholars who've done so much work, and it seems like the focus is often on historical sources or the history of the language. But were there also people working on modern Irish and modern Irish dialects and maybe modern Irish literature as well in the school in the beginning?
Well, people worked on modern Irish. Dialectology was a core part of the school, and of course, T.F. O'Reilly published a very influential book, Irish Dialects Past and Present, in 1932. And under his guidance, a system was set up in the 1940s involving dialect studies, both in Irish and in Scottish Gaelic. And so we had people like Thomas Walder, who published his Irish of Coisharige and Gaeilge Coisharige, and then Eugene O'Curry, again another important scholar I should have mentioned, who worked on the Irish of Muskerry, Chonnlaoich, who worked on the Irish of Tourmakeady, Wakanali, on North Mayo, the Irish of Eris, and there are other studies. And of course, the great Heinrich Wagner, who in his latter years became an assistant professor here, but who had undertaken to publish the great survey of Irish dialects, LACID, Linguistic Atlas and Survey of Irish Dialects. And of course, he was assisted in that by another great scholar, Miles Dillon, he was quite friendly with him. And they worked on that. But contemporary Irish literature did not fall into the remit of the school. Basically because most of the material we're working with is in manuscript form. Contemporary Irish literature is in print form. And of course this has grown hugely, and there's room for much more study, but perhaps a different school in which to accommodate the study of contemporary Irish literature.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess it is already a lot to do for the school. And so since this year we're celebrating the 85th anniversary of DIAS and of the school, as you said, can we maybe discuss what do you think the impact of the school has been on studies on the Irish language, but also maybe the Celtic studies community worldwide? What has changed because of the school, do you think?
Well, a number of things. It has afforded scholars working in different countries opportunities to come here and to spend 3 years studying here as scholars in the school. Our publications programme also gives a publication platform to international scholars, and our works, we try to keep them all in print and make them available at a reasonable price. And if you look at the prices charged by some of the international publications, you'll see that we do a good job in that as well. But we also have the conferences, which afford scholars a platform, and we look upon ourselves as being a neutral space. We have good relationships with university and departments of Celtic Studies in Ireland, in Britain, and further afield. And we try to encourage them. So some scholars may like to spend a sabbatical period with us here, and we try and make these our facilities available for that. And of course, it should be mentioned that Brian O'Keefe, whom I just mentioned, was one of the driving forces behind the establishment of the International Congress of Celtic Studies, which brings every 4 years, brings the world of Celtic Studies together in a different location. Next one will be in Salamanca in a couple of years' time, and the last one was in Utrecht, where again there has been for over 100 years a very successful department of Celtic Studies.
Yeah, and of course you're on the board of the Congress, so you would know the impact that this has had, and how important this Congress is for the whole community of Celtic Studies, for everyone to come together at least once every 4 years and know what the others are doing elsewhere. Exactly.
As I said before, quite apart from the work we do in the long and lonely hours on our own, it's also important to go out and meet people, to speak to people, to exchange ideas, to find out what they're doing, to argue with them if necessary, or to agree with them, and to find out what's going on. I've always found, both as a young scholar, my first Celtic Congress was in Galway in 1979. Very, very enjoyable Congress it was. I was working in Uppsala at the time, but I came away totally invigorated. I'd heard so many different ideas. I'd spoken with so many people, heard so many interesting papers, and returned really rearing to go and to do more research and to find out more about what had interested me there.
Yeah. That's that's also my experience of my first Congress. Mine was in Bangor in 2019, and I remember as a tiny master's student at the time, I was like, this is brilliant. I can't believe there's so many people who like the same things I do.
Yes.
So yeah, no, that's great to hear. And so I guess now that we've done 85 years of DIAS, how has research changed, and how do you think DIAS has been adapting, especially, I guess, digital research has become a lot more important and a lot more useful as well now. And so how has the school adapted to this, and what changes have been made?
Well, okay, I'd answer this question in two ways. Initially, in Celtic Studies, we're interested in producing the texts and making the texts available as best could be done. That remains still a core interest, the addition of texts. But also, since that time, to say something about what the texts involve, and to offer a literary analysis of the text. When I was a young student at UCT, there was very little available that would deal with texts as a literature as such. There were some Thomas Davis lectures, a number of papers here and there. And I remember the publication in the mid-70s of Tomás Ó Cahas's The Heroic Biography of Cormac MacArt, which gave a great fillip to the study of literature. So we're looking at the contents and also the comparative aspect of it, looking at the influence the classical languages or classical learning may have had on Irish, looking at inherited influences, looking at developments in early modern Europe, how chivalry, for instance, might have interest, how the great themes of love, poetry and other things may have influenced it, and how developed in that way. So this remains an ongoing process. And of course, there have been significant developments in technology, the use of computing, the use of digital editing has greatly revolutionised our field. On another level, on another area of digital technology that's very, very important, I would single out the Irish Script and Screen Initiative, ISOS, established in the late 90s. It's a system whereby manuscript images are captured digitally and produced online or on screen. Since its inception, roughly 450 Irish manuscripts of a total of in excess of 5,000 have been digitised, and these would include important manuscripts such as Leabhar na Oidheadh, the oldest all-Irish manuscript, the Book of Leinster, the Book of Ballymote, the Book of Lecan, and so on. And what this means is that a scholar working in Alaska or Australia, in Canada or Chile, can access this. And because of the facility with which digital technology can now be applied to this, it's possible to expand, to zero in, to zone in on area. Consider, let's say, not so long ago, if a person were studying a text that occurred in a couple of manuscripts, maybe one in the Royal Irish Academy, another in Trinity College Dublin, one in the National Library of Ireland, one would have had to go to each of these places and to jot them down. Now one can look at them side by side, can import them from the different repository, can compare and contrast them. And this is hugely revolutionised. And it means, of course, that people don't have to travel. And there's another important aspect to this that people may not always realise. It helps to preserve the manuscripts, because if people are coming and handling manuscripts, no matter how carefully, in time this is wear and tear and can lead to some degree of dilapidation. But now, of course, there will always be need to consult the manuscript in the original, but having the facility to view it on your desk and to expand it, and sometimes the expansion, the process will allow you to see things that would not be visible maybe to the naked eye or not as clear to the naked eye. So that has been hugely important. And other digital facilities are, for instance, Bibliography of Irish Language and Literature, and this was established in 1913 by R.I. Best, who became one of the first professors. The first volume was published by R.I. Best under the Stationery Office. And then when he became professor in the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies, the second volume was published here. And the third volume was published by Ralph Baumgarten in the 80s. And then since then, it has gone online. So the latest publications in Celtic Studies, or if you wish to get references, this is the place to which you go. And I should also mention another great initiative that will be joining us soon is the Electronic Dictionary of the Irish Language. This was initially the initiative of Professor Gregory Toner of Queen's University in Belfast. And I'm happy to say that Gregory was a student of mine there, my first PhD student. I'll have to get that in. But he took a course in computer science and applied this with amazing success to the Dictionary of the Irish Language. And it's now available in digital form. And since then, he was joined by Professor hUiginn, now of Cambridge University, who... together with him, they got funding for a number of schemes to enhance and to build on the Dictionary of the Irish Language. So now I'm dutifully got my copy of the dictionary very many years ago and had them bound in the book binder in Queen's University in Belfast. But I find that I very rarely use them. I'm now going all the time to Oidheadh, because you can search for English to Irish, you can do you can do wildcard searches, you can do all different things. And this is being brought to the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies. We've agreed that it will move from Queen's University Belfast to the Dublin Institute. So again, when asking how we benefit the field, this again by housing electronic data. And yet another project I should mention is the Ogam in 3D project, a project embarked on many years ago to capture the Ogam inscriptions, many of which are indoors and preserved, but some of which are still outdoors and subject to weathering and all the rest of it. And to make 3D images of them. And David Stifter Professor David Stifter of Maynooth University has now, with Catherine Forsyth of Glasgow, has embarked on another project, well, it's nearing completion now, which will complete the digitalisation of the Ogam inscriptions, and also looked at Ogam in written form, in handwritten form. And the results of this, we hope, will also be made available on the site of the Dublin Institute in the very near future.
Yeah, that's a lot of important, really important websites that are hosted thanks to the Institute. And I must say that they're extremely useful, and I use them every day. And before I came to the Institute, I used them every day as well. So I think, yeah, it's worth for listeners who haven't been to those websites to just go have a look, because Irish manuscripts are beautiful. Oidheadh is incredibly useful. OM in 3D gives you access to stones that you might never see otherwise, and they're really wonderful projects, and it's great that the Institute can offer that support. And so we've talked about how much all the research that's been done in the Institute and how we've tried to address the duties of the school and to respond to those as set out in the Act. But what do you think is still to be done? You mentioned about a lot about the manuscripts, obviously, that remain to be read. Are there any other gaps in current research that you think still need to be addressed?
Well, of course, yeah. The manuscripts, the written sources are hugely important, and they have to be investigated continually. And they haven't yielded all their secrets to us yet, and won't do for a very long time. So this will be central, but also engagement with other fields is very important. When I was in Maynooth, we instigated a series in the in collaboration with the Royal Irish Academy, which looked at individual Irish manuscripts in the context of a conference. But we also took in the expertise of art historian to look at the artwork. Because remember, the artefacts we have, the manuscripts we have, were written in a community that would have involved scholars and writers, and people who would have taken care of the materiality of the manuscript, or taken care of the vellum, would have produced the ink and all the rest of it. But nowadays, in modern academic life, we're sort of pigeonholed into different disciplines. Whereas this would have come from a whole. So it's very important to speak with people in neighbouring disciplines and to engage with them and to share our insights. And in my career in its entirety, I've always tried to do that with archaeologists or with historians or with other people as well. I think it's hugely important and also very enriching.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can vouch for that talking to people who do different things, even who work on different medieval languages, can just shed so much light on your own research. So it's extremely important.
Indeed.
So 85 years of DIAS and much more before that as well. That's a lot of things have been achieved. There are still, as we've said, gaps in the knowledge. And you mentioned the plan of bringing EDIL to DIAS. So do you have any other plans, and what are your hopes for the future of the School of Celtic Studies?
Well, obviously, I hope it will develop and grow, because there's so much to be done. Celtic Studies is an important discipline. It has a very, very rich body of material and deserves to be respected. Because if you look at it in a wider picture, this is part of mankind's inheritance. It's not just about Ireland or about Wales or about Brittany or about Scotland. We have records here of mankind's interaction, of how the world was viewed, of how people interacted with each other, of how sciences developed. And of course, science was also very, very important. Sciences such as computistics, which looked at the manner in which the date of Easter would be calculated, involved mathematics as well as celestial observation. But this is an important part of Europe's and of mankind's inheritance, and needs to be respected and needs to be understood and investigated further, and to see how it relates to other disciplines, and again their neighbouring disciplines of English, Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Viking studies, and the other linguistic families that are close by, the classical languages, of course, as well.
All right. So moving forward then, the school will continue to host postdoctoral scholars. We have many senior professors like yourself. So I guess for any listeners who might want to learn more about what each and everyone in the school is doing, or what the events that we organize, such as series of lectures, what would you say? Where can they find information?
Well, hopefully on our website, or try to keep up to date now, but also they should register, send a note to our administrator and ask to be put on our mailing list. And as we arrange events or publish books, information will be sent out to them about it.
Well, that's very exciting, and well, thank you so much for shedding so much light on the school, on what we do, and also on I think the history and the background of all of this is very important. And as you said, Celtic Studies is an important is an important field, an important way of understanding mankind's inheritance and all sorts of different things about our histories, our literature, our stories. So thank you for coming to the podcast and explaining all of this to us.
Tá míle fáilte rud. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Ní Ansa, the research podcast of the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. If you're interested in learning more about today's topic, check out the description below. And for more information about the school, you can go to dias.ie. More episodes are coming your way soon. Slán!